found her on Facebook and wrote to her saying, this is probably the message that you've been dreading, but can we speak? Because I wanted to know what she was prepared for me to disclose or not. She didn't say, I don't want you to speak. So you gave me your blessing to go ahead and say, talk as much as I wanted about the situation and my aspect, my role in it, but just not to mention her.
You just weren't ready at that point?
Absolutely not ready. I'd been married to someone for 10 years who didn't know a thing about this whole episode in my life. My parents still didn't know about what had happened to me so many years ago. And I think everybody is just on a very personal journey with their own decision whether or not to come forward.
Did you feel threatened by him early on, or had you just sort of adapted to an understanding that, you know, he came with baggage?
I was pretty young when I went to work for Harvey, so it was obviously incredibly intimidating, but it was a situation that was incredibly intimidating. So not just, you know, obviously people focus a lot on questions about the sexual assault, but Harvey was intimidating in many ways. He was legendary. He physically loomed large. He had a legendary temper also. I was very keen to be successful in the film industry, and to some extent there was a normalising. I normalised it to myself, thinking, well, you know, these Hollywood producers, they throw phones and throw scripts and they throw all the toys out of the pram, and dealing with that is part of figuring out whether or not you can succeed in a highly competitive industry that everybody else wants to get into.
So the demonstration of power, in a sense, was about everything. It was about language, it was about approach, and the sexual advance was part and parcel of that.
Right, and that's sometimes I think that is difficult to grasp, that the sexual advances are part of a cajoling process that's very much wrapped up in other things. It's very much bound up in what is your view on these scripts, and I think then it is really difficult then to distangle appropriate from inappropriate, and also you are on a very gradual slide down to very much inappropriate requests, such as requests for massage and further sexual favours.
Because it came to a head in the Venice Film Festival in a hotel bedroom where presumably he still had the power to take you by surprise.
Right, and it's important to point out that the hotel, it sounds like a hotel bedroom is an inappropriate place for an employer and an employee to find themselves, but that hotel suite was being also used as an office, and that was my place of work during the time that I was at the Venice Film Festival.
And you describe in the piece that you wrote that he pushed himself on top of you. You'd been wearing 2 pairs of tights, so something presumably had been normalised in the way that a woman thinks she has to wear 2 pairs of tights to protect her from her boss.
That's right. It at times appeared to be a sort of game where I bought time, and my 2 pairs of tights bought time. So I spent time in that hotel room trying to get back to work, trying to fend off inappropriate remarks, fend off inappropriate moves, and say, no, I have a boyfriend, or no, let's focus on the script. And having 2 pairs of tights was part of that. I could concede something that didn't matter. I could take off 1 pair of tights, but I'd still have another pair of tights on.
He attempted that night to rape you, and you escaped. You fled the room. What do you think made him let you go?
There was a sense that I was a slow-boiling frog, and certain things happened on the first night, but I was back the second night, and things got progressively worse on the second night. But I'm pretty sure he was in it for the long game, not super long, but there would be a 3rd night and a 4th night on this particular trip. And I think eventually I was permitted to leave because it was, as I mentioned, part of a game, and that there would be another part to this game.
And were you shocked, Zelda, or had you...
Yes, I was utterly horrified. I knew, you know, how Harvey was coercive because I'd spent 4 years working for him. When Rowena told me the following morning, I mean, I was completely shattered because I never believed that he had it in him to use any form of physical force. I genuinely didn't. And as far as I was concerned, Rowena was my responsibility because she was working directly for me and I had put her in that room.
There was no game plan with you two. You were young women in your 20s. I mean, you had no sense of what would happen next.
No, I think I very naively presumed that we would seek justice and find justice.
Well, I think first we approached one senior executive at Miramax London in an attempt to escalate it internally before we brought lawyers on, and it was her recommendation. She recommended that we speak to lawyers, and I guess as we worked through the different layers, someone senior in the office, then lawyers outside of that office, I thought that there'd be much more of a turning around and being taking us seriously, and a lot more, I guess, shock. And I felt like there was insufficient. It's almost as though people weren't shocked, instead they sort of backed away. Well, they were reacting in a shocked way, but only in their way. I actually feel that I had more of a reaction from Zelda than I expected, which was gratifying is absolutely the wrong word, but it was comforting that Zelda took me seriously. But after Zelda's reaction, none of the other people that I spoke to took us seriously at all, which was, I found that quite horrifying.
And the only way you got them to listen was through a financial settlement, is that right?
Well, not exactly. I mean, our only motivation was to try and stop Harvey's behaviour. That was all that we cared about, so that this didn't happen to somebody else again. We wanted him to be stopped. And our lawyer said, well, that's very unusual, but that's fine. But if you want to start negotiations, this is how it works. You make a financial demand.
Did it ever occur to you, Rowena, not to sign a non-disclosure?
I think at that time, with the intensity under which that agreement was negotiated, I didn't feel we were given much choice but to sign it. You know, we were placed under very difficult circumstances.
So they bought your silence and you took that really seriously?
Yes.
You didn't even tell your husband?
No. I had no further contact with Zelda. I had to go on with my life and never ever mention this part of my life again. So it was to seem as though it were a black hole and I wasn't to ever speak of it to anybody, even those who stood with me during the process of signing the NDA.
Did it ever occur to you to break that silence, to break the non-disclosure agreement?
It did not. The emotional impact of the way in which we were it was impressed upon us that we must never, ever speak of this again, stayed with me for 2 decades. And even without the precise details, I walked away with an impression that something truly, truly terrible would happen to either me or my loved ones if I ever spoke out.
What happened in that hotel room changed the course of your life forever. You tried to take your own life twice.
That's right. It did forever change the course of my emotional life, my career really, and has been a deep impact. And I think that that is hopefully helpful to emphasize in terms of, you know, telling this story for other women who might think, you know, an NDA or a settlement agreement is the end of the matter. For me, at least, it very much wasn't.
You worked really hard to fight the NDA that demands cover-up of illegal activity. You want to outlaw that and change that for good. Has anything changed fundamentally?
Actual change has not happened. The government's consultation has resulted in really no change. Their response to all of this is, oh yes, we must make sure that NDAs can't stop people from reporting to the police. I mean, this is something that is already a given. You know, whistleblowing laws, they haven't grasped this at all. The Solicitors Regulation Authority, the Law Society, the Bar Association, none of them have actually created any new ethical guidance for solicitors in this area. I'm not blaming the lawyers. They weren't doing anything illegal. That's what's so terrifying. And that's why even reforming NDAs is not going to solve this problem.
He's now going through the courts, a criminal process. What do you want to happen to Harvey Weinstein?
Speaking as a victim of his, I think it would be hard to put that question to anyone who had been assaulted by Harvey and have them say that they wouldn't want to see him go to jail. And so of course I'd like to see him go to jail, but I'd like to caution that the story doesn't end with will Harvey go to jail or will he not go to jail. This is one individual in what is now clear is a culture of too much looking the other way when sexual assault happens, and a culture of enablement, which is, you know, he was part of a system that enabled him to get away with this type of behaviour on countless women over many decades. And I think there's a danger in over putting too much emphasis on the monster that Harvey Weinstein is. I think the trap about that is that ordinary men and women that going about their regular business at work think that an inappropriate comment or a slight inappropriate touch in the workplace is not connected. You know, they might sit and say, I'm not a Harvey Weinstein, I'm not a Jeffrey Epstein. It allows men to normalise their own behaviour. Whereas I'd like to see this as a spectrum of change against predatory behaviour of all kinds in the workplace and outside of the workplace.
Thank you both very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.